A poor maid was dragged away by security guards, her hands trembling, while the millionaire's deaf son screamed a word he had never spoken in his 8 years of life. "Don't take her." For 8 years, this boy had lived in complete silence. Doctors said he would never hear. His father spent millions trying to fix him. But in just 60 seconds, this woman in her dark green uniform did the impossible. What she pulled out of that child's ear made everyone in the room step back in shock. And when the boy spoke his first word, his father in his light gray suit fell to his knees and wept. Stay with me, because what happens next will break your heart, restore your faith, and remind you that sometimes the greatest miracles don't come from medicine or money. They come from someone who simply refuses to look away when a child is suffering. This is a true story about love, courage, and the moment everything changed. Welcome to the City of Stories. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me take you back to where it all began. In the heart of Los Angeles stood a mansion so grand that people would stop their cars just to stare at it through the tall iron gates. The house belonged to Victor Hayes, one of the richest men in America. Victor owned the biggest private aviation company in the country. His planes flew across the world. His name appeared in business magazines. His wealth could buy almost anything on this earth. But inside that beautiful mansion, there lived a sadness that no amount of money could fix. Victor had a son. His name was Oliver. Oliver was 8 years old, with bright brown eyes and soft dark hair. He looked like any other child in his little lavender shirt and comfortable clothes. He played with toys. He smiled when he was happy. But Oliver had never heard a single sound in his entire life. He was born deaf. When Oliver was a baby, Victor took him to every doctor in California. Then he flew to New York. Then to London. Then to Switzerland. He met with specialists whose appointments cost thousands of dollars for just 1 hour. Victor would arrive at these appointments in his perfectly tailored light gray suits, representing success and wealth. But inside, he was just a desperate father. Each doctor ran tests. Each one promised hope. Each one said, "Mr. Hayes, we're doing everything we can." But nothing changed. Oliver grew from a baby to a toddler to a young boy, and still, he lived in complete silence. The mansion had 15 bedrooms, a swimming pool that sparkled like diamonds, and gardens that looked like they belonged in a palace. But Oliver didn't care about any of that. He would sit by his window and watch the birds in the trees. He could see their beaks opening and closing, but he couldn't hear their songs. He would press his small hand against the glass when it rained, watching the water fall, wondering what sound it made. Sometimes, late at night, Victor would stand outside his son's bedroom door and just watch him sleep. His heart would break a little more each time. He had built an empire. He had created something from nothing. But he couldn't give his own son the gift of hearing. That pain never left him. The people who worked in the mansion had learned to communicate with Oliver using simple sign language. But most of them didn't really try. They felt uncomfortable around him. Some pitied him. Others simply avoided him. They would whisper among themselves when they thought no one was listening. "Poor child," they would say. "So much money, but it can't help him." Oliver felt their distance. Children are smart. They know when people see them as different. So Oliver stayed quiet, playing alone in his big empty house, surrounded by expensive things but starving for connection. Then one day, everything began to change. Her name was Isabel. She was 26 years old, with kind eyes and hands that were rough from years of hard work. Isabel had come to Los Angeles from a small town in Arizona, looking for any job she could find. Her mother was sick, and the hospital bills were piling up like mountains. She needed money, and she needed it desperately. When she applied to work at the Hayes mansion, she didn't know anything about Victor or his aviation empire. She just needed the job. When they hired her as a housekeeper, she was grateful. She promised herself she would work harder than anyone else. Isabel wore a simple dark green uniform every day. She washed it by hand every night and hung it carefully to dry. She tied her long black hair into a neat bun. She arrived early and left late. She never complained. She never asked for anything extra. But Isabel carried something inside her that made her different from the other workers. She carried a memory that shaped everything she did. Years ago, Isabel had a younger sister named Carolina. Carolina was only 5 years old when she got a terrible ear infection. Their family was poor. They couldn't afford good doctors. They waited too long. By the time they got help, it was too late. Carolina lost her hearing. And a few years after that, another infection took her life. Isabel remembered holding her sister's hand in the hospital. She remembered how Carolina looked at her with scared eyes, trying to speak but unable to hear her own voice. She remembered the helplessness, the guilt, the pain of watching someone suffer when you can't do anything to help. Since that day, Isabel made a promise to herself. If she ever met another child who was suffering, especially a child who couldn't hear, she would never look away. She would never ignore their pain. The first time Isabel saw Oliver, he was sitting on the marble staircase in the mansion, lining up toy airplanes in a perfect row. His small lavender shirt made him look even younger than his 8 years. He didn't look up when she walked past, but she noticed something about him immediately. He was too still, too careful. His movements were different from other children. She asked one of the other housekeepers, "What's wrong with the boy?" The woman whispered back, "He's deaf. Born that way. Mr. Hayes has spent millions trying to fix it, but nothing works. Best to just leave him alone." The boss doesn't like staff getting too close to his son. But Isabel couldn't just leave him alone. Every time she saw Oliver, she saw Carolina. And her heart wouldn't let her walk away. So she started small. She would leave little things for him. A folded paper flower on the step where he played. A piece of candy wrapped in gold paper. A small drawing of an airplane. At first, Oliver didn't react. But slowly, something began to shift. One morning, the candy was gone. The paper flowers sat next to his toys. And when Isabel walked past him one day, he looked up and smiled. That smile changed everything. Day by day, something beautiful started growing between Isabel and Oliver. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and gentle, like a flower pushing through concrete. Isabel learned that Oliver spent most of his time alone. His father was always working, always traveling, always on phone calls that seemed more important than anything else. Victor loved his son. Anyone could see that. But he loved him from a distance, like he was afraid to get too close to the pain. The other staff members kept their interactions with Oliver brief and professional. They would nod at him, smile politely, and move on. But Isabel was different. She would sit with him. She would play with him. She would look him directly in the eyes and make him feel seen. She started learning more sign language from videos on her phone late at night in her small room. She practiced in front of the mirror, moving her hands slowly, making sure she got it right. Then she would use these signs with Oliver, and his face would light up like the sun breaking through clouds. Oliver began following her around the mansion. When she cleaned the windows, he would stand beside her, watching. When she folded laundry, he would help her match the socks. When she took her lunch break in the garden, he would sit next to her on the bench, and they would share her sandwich in comfortable silence. For the first time since Carolina died, Isabel felt like she was doing something that mattered. And for the first time in his life, Oliver had a friend. But not everyone was happy about this friendship. Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, was a stern woman with gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She had worked for the Hayes family for 12 years and took pride in following every rule. One afternoon, she pulled Isabel aside in the hallway, her dark green uniform still damp from cleaning. "You're spending too much time with the boy," she said sharply. Isabel looked at her, confused. "I'm just being kind to him. Mr. Hayes doesn't like the staff getting attached to his son. He's very protective. You're here to clean, not to play nanny." Isabel felt her chest tighten. "But the child is lonely. Can't you see that?" Mrs. Patterson's face hardened. "What I see is a girl who's going to lose her job if she doesn't remember her place. Stay away from Oliver. That's an order." Isabel nodded slowly, but inside, her heart was fighting back. She thought about Carolina again. She thought about all the times no one helped because they were too afraid or too busy. She couldn't do that again. She wouldn't. That night, Isabel prayed in her small room. "God," she whispered, "show me what to do. I don't want to lose this job. My mother needs me. But that little boy needs someone too." The next morning, she tried to keep her distance like Mrs. Patterson had ordered. When Oliver approached her in the hallway, she smiled but kept walking. When he tried to show her his drawing, she gently shook her head and pointed to her work. Oliver's face fell. His smile disappeared. He stood there holding his drawing, looking confused and hurt. Then he walked away slowly, his small shoulders slumped. Isabel's heart shattered. She stood frozen in the hallway, holding her cleaning cloth, feeling like the worst person in the world. That image of Oliver walking away stayed with her all day. By evening, she couldn't take it anymore. She found Oliver sitting in the garden, alone as always. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. He was wearing his favorite lavender shirt, and he was touching his ear and wincing, like something was bothering him. Isabel walked over and sat beside him. She gently touched his shoulder. He looked up, and she could see tears in his eyes. Not from sadness, but from discomfort. She signed to him, "Are you okay? Does something hurt?" He nodded and pointed to his ear. Isabel's heart started beating faster. She leaned closer, trying to see. She tilted his head gently toward the fading sunlight. And there, deep inside his ear, she saw something. Something dark. Something that shouldn't be there. Her breath caught. She thought maybe it was just a shadow, just her imagination. But Oliver winced again, and she knew something was wrong. She signed to him, "We should tell your father. He can take you to the doctor." Oliver's eyes went wide with fear. He shook his head violently. His hands moved quickly, signing words she had taught him. "No doctors. They hurt me. Please, no doctors." Isabel's heart broke all over again. She understood that fear. She remembered Carolina crying in the hospital, scared of the needles, scared of the strange machines, scared of people in white coats who poked and prodded her. "I won't let them hurt you," she signed back. "I promise." But Oliver kept shaking his head. He grabbed her hand and squeezed it tight, his eyes begging her not to tell anyone. Isabel sat there, torn between what she knew she should do and what Oliver needed her to do. The sun continued to set, and the garden grew darker. She made a decision then, sitting in that fading light. She would watch him closely. She would wait. And if things got worse, she would act, no matter what anyone said. What Isabel didn't know was that things were about to get much worse. And very soon, she would have to make a choice that would change 3 lives forever. That night, Oliver's pain grew stronger. And Isabel's promise would be tested in ways she never imagined. Friends, this is where our story takes a turn. This is where a simple act of kindness becomes something much bigger. Stay with me, because what happens next will show you what real courage looks like. For the next 2 days, Isabel watched Oliver carefully. She saw him touching his ear more often. She saw him wince when no one else was looking. She saw the pain growing in his eyes, even though he tried to hide it. His little lavender shirt became a familiar sight as he followed her around, seeking comfort. Victor was away on a business trip to Tokyo. He was negotiating a contract to buy a fleet of new planes for his aviation company. Millions of dollars were involved. His phone rang constantly. His mind was on spreadsheets and meetings and deals. Even from across the world, his light gray suits were impeccable, his appearance professional, but his heart was far from home. He called home every evening to check on Oliver. "Is my son okay?" he would ask Mrs. Patterson. "Yes, Mr. Hayes," she would reply. "Everything is fine." But everything was not fine. On the 3rd day, Isabel found Oliver in his playroom, curled up on the floor, holding his ear with both hands. His lavender shirt was wrinkled from tossing and turning. His face was red. Tears ran down his cheeks. He was rocking back and forth, trying to deal with pain that an 8-year-old shouldn't have to bear. Isabel rushed to him and knelt down, her dark green uniform brushing against the floor. "Oliver," she signed frantically, "we have to get help." He shook his head again, but weaker this time. The fear in his eyes was being replaced by desperation. Isabel made a decision in that moment. She thought about Carolina. She thought about how she had waited too long to push for help, how she had listened to adults who said everything would be fine, how she had been too young and too scared to fight harder. She would not make that mistake again. "Oliver," she signed gently, "I'm going to help you. I promise I'll be gentle. Do you trust me?" Oliver looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Isabel's hands were shaking as she went to her room and got a small bobby pin from her hair. She cleaned it carefully with rubbing alcohol. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Please God," she whispered, "guide my hands. Don't let me hurt this child." She went back to Oliver and had him lie down on the couch with his head on her lap. The afternoon light came through the window, giving her just enough brightness to see. She took a deep breath and looked into his ear again. There it was. That dark thing. It looked almost like it was moving, like it was alive. It made her stomach turn, but she steadied herself. "Hold very still," she signed to Oliver. "If it hurts too much, tap my leg and I'll stop." He nodded, squeezing his eyes shut. Isabel moved the bobby pin closer with trembling fingers. She could barely breathe. One wrong move and she could hurt him badly. But doing nothing meant watching him suffer, and that was something she could not do. The tip of the bobby pin touched something soft and sticky. Isabel felt sick but kept going. Slowly, carefully, she hooked whatever it was and began to pull. For a moment, nothing happened. Then something dark and wet slid out and fell into her palm. It was round, black, and slightly moving. Some kind of insect or larva that had been living in Oliver's ear. Who knows for how long? Isabel gasped, almost dropping it. But then something else happened. Something impossible. Oliver sat up suddenly. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened. And a sound came out. A rough, broken sound that didn't quite form a word, but it was real. It was his voice. Isabel froze. "Oliver," she whispered. His head snapped toward her. His eyes filled with shock and confusion and wonder all at once. He could hear her. "Oliver, can you hear me?" she asked again, her voice shaking. "Yes," he said, the word rough and strange, like he was learning to speak for the first time. I hear you." Tears poured down Isabel's face. She pulled him into a hug, laughing and crying at the same time. Oh my God, you can hear." But Oliver suddenly covered his ears and whimpered. Every sound was new and overwhelming. The ticking of the clock on the wall. The hum of the air conditioning. The sound of footsteps in the hallway. It was too much all at once. "It's okay," Isabel said softly, holding him gently. "It's going to be okay. These are just sounds. You're safe." But they were not alone. Mrs. Patterson had heard the commotion and rushed into the room. She stopped dead in the doorway, her face going pale. "What have you done?" she whispered. "He can hear," Isabel said, smiling through her tears. "Mrs. Patterson, Oliver can hear." But Mrs. Patterson didn't smile back. Her face twisted with anger and fear. "You touched him? You went near him with that thing in your hand? Do you realize what you've done? Mr. Hayes is going to kill you." "No, please listen," Isabel started to say. But Mrs. Patterson was already running down the hallway, shouting, "Someone call Mr. Hayes. Call him right now. There's been an emergency with Oliver." Oliver clung to Isabel, frightened by all the shouting. "Don't leave me," he said in his new, shaky voice. "I won't," Isabel promised. "I won't leave you." But even as she said it, she heard heavy footsteps. Security guards were coming. And she knew that in moments, everything was about to change. Victor Hayes was about to receive a phone call that would shake his entire world. And Isabel was about to face the consequences of doing what she believed was right, even when everyone told her it was wrong. Sometimes, my friends, doing the right thing costs us everything. But that doesn't make it any less right. The phone call reached Victor while he was in a meeting on the 47th floor of a building in Tokyo. When he saw his home number flashing on his screen, he knew something was wrong. Victor always knew. He was wearing his perfectly pressed light gray suit, looking every bit the successful businessman. But in that moment, he was just a terrified father. "Sir, there's been an incident with Oliver." Mrs. Patterson's voice was panicked on the other end. "The maid, Isabel, she did something to him. She put something in his ear. You need to come home immediately." Victor's blood ran cold. "What do you mean she did something to him? Is my son hurt?" I don't know, sir. But something's very wrong. She had some kind of tool, and she was touching his ear, and now." Victor didn't wait to hear the rest. He hung up, grabbed his coat, and ran. Within 3 hours, he was on his private jet racing back to Los Angeles. His heart pounded the entire flight. His mind created terrible scenarios. His son, his only child, possibly hurt by someone he had trusted in his own home. When he burst through the mansion doors, his light gray suit slightly disheveled from the rush, he found security guards surrounding Isabel in the main hallway. She stood there in her dark green uniform, wrinkled now, her eyes red from crying, but her head held high. Oliver, still in his lavender shirt, was clinging to her leg, refusing to let go. "Get away from my son," Victor shouted, his voice echoing through the marble halls. But something stopped him. Oliver turned around, his lavender shirt twisted from the commotion, and with tears streaming down his face, he said, "Dad." Victor froze. The whole world seemed to stop spinning. His light gray suit suddenly felt too tight, his tie too constricting. "Dad, don't hurt her," Oliver said again. His voice was rough and uncertain, but it was real. It was his son's voice, a voice Victor had dreamed of hearing for 8 years. "How?" Victor could barely speak. "How is this possible?" Isabel stepped forward, her dark green uniform a stark contrast to Victor's expensive light gray suit. But in that moment, she was his equal. Her voice was steady despite her fear. "Mr. Hayes, please let me explain. Oliver had something in his ear. I saw him in pain for days. I pulled it out, and suddenly he could hear. I didn't hurt him. I would never hurt him." Victor looked at his son, then at Isabel, then back at his son. Oliver was speaking. After 8 years of silence, his boy was speaking. The security guard stood confused, not knowing what to do. Mrs. Patterson stood in the corner, her mouth open in shock. "We need to get him to the hospital," Victor finally said. "Right now." They rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. The entire drive, Oliver, still wearing his now rumpled lavender shirt, held Isabel's hand on one side and his father's hand on the other. He kept making small sounds, testing his voice, amazed by every word. Victor sat rigid in his light gray suit, trying to process the impossible. At the hospital, doctors ran every test they could think of. They examined Oliver's ears, took scans, analyzed his hearing. The head specialist, Dr. Richard Morrison, was one of the same doctors who had treated Oliver as a baby. After 2 hours, Dr. Morrison came out to speak with Victor. His face was pale. "Mr. Hayes, I need to speak with you privately." They went into a small office. Dr. Morrison closed the door and sat down heavily. "Your son's hearing has been restored. I don't know how, but it's real." "That's wonderful," Victor said. "So what's the problem?" Dr. Morrison pulled out a folder. "Mr. Hayes, we found something during our examination. Evidence of a foreign object that had been lodged in your son's ear canal for possibly years. And when we looked back at his medical records..." He paused, struggling with his words. "We should have found this years ago." Victor's face darkened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your son's condition might have been treatable all along. This blockage, if we had discovered it during any of his routine examinations, could have been removed. Your son might never have needed to suffer." The room went silent. Victor's hands started to shake. "Are you telling me," he said slowly, each word careful and controlled, "that for 8 years you people examined my son, charged me millions of dollars, and missed something that a housekeeper found in 3 days?" Dr. Morrison looked down. "Mr. Hayes, I don't have an excuse. This should never have happened." Victor stood up so fast his chair fell backward, his light gray suit jacket swinging open. "My son," his voice was shaking now, "my son lived in silence because you didn't look carefully enough? Because you were too busy collecting your fees to actually care." He grabbed the medical files and started reading. Page after page of reports, all signed, all stamped, all certified. And then he saw it, hidden in the financial section. Notes about maintaining long-term patient engagement and continued treatment protocols for sustained revenue. They had kept his son sick on purpose. To keep the money flowing. Victor felt something break inside him. All his power, all his wealth, all his success, it had meant nothing. It had actually worked against him. These people saw his money and decided his son's suffering was profitable. He walked out of the office in a daze, his light gray suit seeming less important now, less impressive. In the hallway, he saw Isabel in her dark green uniform sitting with Oliver in his lavender shirt. She was teaching him to whisper, showing him how to control the volume of his new voice. Oliver was laughing, a sound Victor had never heard before. This woman, this poor housekeeper in a simple dark green uniform, who probably made in a year what he spent on a single tailored suit, she had done what the best doctors in the world couldn't. Not because she was smarter, but because she actually cared. Victor sat down next to them. Oliver looked at his father and smiled. "Dad, I can hear the birds now. Isabel says they're singing." Victor's eyes filled with tears. He had spent 8 years chasing cures around the world when the answer was right here. In kindness. In paying attention. In someone who looked at his son and saw a child who needed help, not a paycheck. "Isabel," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I owe you more than that." She shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Hayes. I just did what anyone should do." "No," Victor said firmly. "You did what almost no one else would do. And I will never forget that." That night, Victor made a decision that would change everything. My friends, we've reached the end of our story. And this is where we learn what truly matters in life. This is where a man discovers that the greatest wealth isn't measured in money, but in moments. In voices. In second chances. 2 days after Oliver's miracle, Victor called a press conference. Reporters from every major news outlet in America gathered in the conference room of his aviation company headquarters. Cameras flashed. Microphones crowded the podium. Everyone wondered why Victor Hayes, who usually avoided the media, had suddenly called them all together. Victor walked to the podium in a fresh light gray suit, perfectly tailored as always, with Isabel standing beside him in her dark green uniform, freshly pressed for the occasion. He had asked her to be there, and though she was terrified, she agreed. He began to speak, his voice steady but filled with emotion. My name is Victor Hayes. Most of you know me as the owner of Hayes Aviation. For the past 15 years, I've built this company from nothing into one of the largest private aviation firms in the country. I've made more money than most people will see in a lifetime. He paused, looking down at his notes, then pushed them aside. But I stand before you today as a father who failed his son. For 8 years, my boy Oliver couldn't hear. I took him to the most expensive doctors in the world. I paid for treatments that promised miracles. I believed that my money could fix anything. I was wrong. The room was completely silent. 3 days ago, a housekeeper in my home named Isabel did something that none of those doctors could do. She looked at my son, really looked at him, and she saw his pain. She found something in his ear that should have been discovered years ago. And because of her courage and her compassion, my son can now hear. People in the audience gasped. Cameras clicked furiously. Isabel stood there in her dark green uniform, humble and quiet, while Victor in his light gray suit commanded the room. Victor's voice grew stronger. But that's not why I called you here. I called you here to tell the truth about what I discovered. The doctors who treated my son, they knew they could have helped him years ago. But they chose not to, because a sick child from a wealthy family is profitable. A healed child is not. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. I have the documents to prove it, and I will be filing lawsuits against every person and institution involved. But more than that, I'm starting something new. The Oliver Hayes Foundation. We will provide free hearing examinations and treatment for every child in America who needs it, regardless of their family's income. And Isabel, the woman standing beside me, will be the director of this foundation. Isabel's eyes went wide. She hadn't known he was going to say that. Victor turned to her. You showed me what real healing looks like. It doesn't come from fancy offices or expensive equipment. It comes from actually caring about people. Tears ran down Isabel's face. The cameras captured every moment. After the press conference, they returned to the mansion. But it felt different now. The cold, silent halls that used to feel like a museum now echoed with Oliver's voice as he ran through them in his favorite lavender clothes, shouting with joy simply because he could. Isabel, listen to this, he called out, and then he sang a song terribly off-key. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. That evening, as the sun set over Los Angeles, Victor found Isabel in the garden. She was sitting on the bench where she used to eat lunch alone, still wearing her dark green uniform. He had loosened his tie, and his light gray suit jacket was draped over his arm. For once, he looked less like a businessman and more like just a man. You changed my life, Victor said simply. I don't know how to thank you. Isabel smiled. You already have. Seeing Oliver happy, that's all the thanks I need. Victor sat down beside her. I spent so many years believing that money was power. That if I just earned enough, worked hard enough, I could solve any problem. But I was so busy making money that I forgot to actually see my son. I was so afraid of his silence that I couldn't hear what he was really saying. What was he saying? Isabel asked gently. That he just wanted someone to be with him. To really be with him. Not trying to fix him or change him. Just to love him as he is. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Victor said, I've made a lot of deals in my life. I've signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But the most important thing I've ever done was letting you into my son's life. Isabel looked at him with kind eyes. Mr. Hayes, can I tell you something? Please call me Victor. Victor, you didn't fail your son. You were doing the best you could with what you knew. The important thing is that you're here now. You're listening now. That's what matters. Inside the mansion, they could hear Oliver laughing at something on TV. The sound drifted through the open windows like music. His lavender shirt was visible through the window as he bounced excitedly on the couch. He laughs all the time now, Victor said, his voice full of wonder. I never knew what his laugh sounded like. For 8 years, I missed that. But you won't miss it anymore, Isabel said. You have the rest of his life to hear it. Victor nodded, wiping his eyes. I'm going to be a better father. I'm cutting back my hours. I'm going to be there for him. He'll love that, Isabel smiled. Months passed. The Oliver Hayes Foundation opened its doors and helped thousands of children. Isabel worked tirelessly, remembering her sister Carolina in every child she helped. She made sure no family felt the helplessness her family had felt. Victor kept his promise. He started leaving the office early. He coached Oliver's soccer team. He learned sign language, even though Oliver didn't need it anymore because he said, "I should have learned it 8 years ago." And Oliver, sweet Oliver, thrived. He loved sounds. He loved music. He loved the rain and the birds and even the sound of the dishwasher. Every noise was a gift. 1 year after that life-changing day, the three of them stood together in the garden. Oliver was reading a book out loud in his comfortable lavender outfit, practicing his voice. Isabel, in her dark green uniform, was teaching him a new song. Victor, in a casual light gray suit, was just watching them, grateful for every second. "Isabel," Oliver said suddenly, looking up from his book, "do you know what the best sound in the world is?" "What's that?" she asked. "The sound of people caring about each other. That's what saved me. Not medicine. Not money. Just love." Victor pulled them both into a hug. "My son, the philosopher," he said with a laugh. And there, in that garden where Isabel had once sat alone, where Oliver had once played in silence, where Victor had once stood feeling helpless, they had become a family. Not because of blood or money or obligation, but because sometimes the universe brings people together who need each other. Sometimes the poorest person in the room has the richest heart. Sometimes the quietest voice teaches us the most important lessons. And sometimes a simple act of kindness can heal wounds that money never could. Dear viewers, this story reminds us of something we often forget in our busy lives. Success isn't measured by the size of your bank account or the power of your position.